Hey everyone, today I'm going to be talking about the Ashtongue Talisman of Zeal. This is the rep trinket from Ashtongue Deathsworn in Black Temple. You get it at Exalted, and it's kind of a weird trinket. A lot of you guys probably have recently gotten it and you're wondering how good it is. So I'm going to go over everything that I've learned about the trinket in this video. The first thing, I tested this with 1000 spell power and 0 spell power. I found no difference in damage, so it appears there's no spell coefficient on this. However, percent damage things do increase the damage, so that's good. So Sankora increases the damage, Crusade, one-hand weapon specialization, Misery, Avenging Wrath, and the damage of this does snapshot. So any damage modifiers you have when you proc it, you'll continue to get that same damage throughout the entire duration of the damage over time effect. And any damage percent gains you get during a proc when the dot's already on the target, those won't have any effect on the damage. So that's something to keep in mind. So generally, you're going to be using wings and then judgment anyway, so this shouldn't really be any issue, but something to know. The ticks can partially resist, but they cannot fully resist once the dot is actually applied to the target already. However, the judgment, if it resists, will not proc the trinket. And the application of the dot can also be resisted. So this is the biggest weakness of this trinket, is that there are two chances for it to resist. Both are affected by a spell hit. Of course, a Judgment of Righteousness is going to be affected by a spell hit. And then also the application of the dot is also affected by a spell hit. So spell hit has a ton of value for this trinket. It's going to significantly increase how good this trinket is for you. All right, so let's look at some logs from tests I did with this trinket on the PTR. I did these tests on the boss dummy and Shatrath, and I used rank 1 Seal of Righteousness just so I wouldn't run out of mana and I could do a little bit longer test. The first test I did was with 4.11% spell hit. I chose this because that's just 3 out of 3 precision, and then the spell hit Helm Enchant. So that's pretty much the lowest spell hit any Prot Paladin is going to be running with. So I felt like that was a little more valuable than just running full 0%, since no Prot Paladin is ever actually going to have 0% spell hit. So in this first test, this was a 30-minute test about, and we had a 40.1% uptime on Enduring Judgment. Our expected uptime is about 38% with this much spell hit, so we got a little bit lucky on this one, so that's something to keep in mind. The DPS was 27.8, so that's pretty good. I also didn't have the Misery debuff, and these dummies are mechanical, so you don't get the Crusade damage increase on this either. So this DPS number is actually going to be slightly higher. It's going to be about 30 DPS, a little bit higher than that. So that's really not too bad. And let's look at the other test. I did the other one with spell hit cap, so you can see the difference it makes having extra spell hit. So we went from 40% to 51.83% uptime. That is really good. But again, this was a little bit lucky. Our expected is about 49% uptime. So a little bit lucky on that. We had 35.1 DPS. And again, that's without Misery and Crusade. So that number is actually a little bit higher. So that's really strong. And one thing to note about these tests is that I was only spamming Judgment of Righteousness, nothing else. In a real Prot Paladin rotation, you're generally not going to be prioritizing Judgment of Righteousness over all your other stuff. You're going to be Holy Shielding or Consecrating when the cooldowns come up at the same time. So you do need to take these numbers with a grain of salt, on top of the fact that we got slightly lucky on the procs here. We also would, in a real situation, have a few less judgments just because of the way the cooldowns line up and us most likely not prioritizing judgment over everything else. So these numbers are a little bit inflated because of that, so that is something to keep in mind. So let's take a look at how the Ashtongue Talisman of Zeal stacks up to other trinkets in terms of threat per second. These numbers are all from Emrys's Prot Paladin spreadsheet. And one thing you do need to know about the spreadsheet is that there is no way to set a fight duration for it. Everything's based on an infinite fight time. So that's going to skew the threat per second for some things that are more reliant on fight duration for how useful they are. So something to keep in mind. So for the 4.11% spell hit trinkets, I have Mag number 1. That's no surprise given how the trinket works. Number 2 was Darkmoon Card Crusade. However, this is one that's pretty heavily affected by fight duration because the ramp up time for the trinket is the weakest part of it while you're getting all your stacks. So that isn't captured super well in the sheet at the moment. So the true value of Crusade, it's going to depend on fight duration and if you can keep the stacks going the entire fight. So in general, you can downgrade Crusade probably quite a bit from here. There are several fights in the current tier that are like 2 minutes or less. So the value of this trinket will be quite a bit lower on those quick fights. Next, we got Skull of Gul'dan. This is a pretty tough trinket for a Prot Paladin to get. I threw it in there because I know some people do like GDKPs or they might have some way to get this. So just so you have that info, but I don't expect too many Prot Paladies to have this. Next, Mark of the Champion. This is one, if you're an Alliance Pally, there's a pretty good chance you have this. If you're a Horde Pally, there's a decent chance you might not have it. I don't have this myself, but it is pretty widely available in GDKPs, so definitely something a lot of people can possibly get. It might just cost you a lot of gold. And then after Mark of the Champion, that's where our Ashtongue Talisman of Zeal from the test clocks in. But as I mentioned before, the conditions weren't totally realistic, so I've downgraded the threat per second on it by 10% to account for the luck and also just the different rotation you would actually be using. After that, we have Icon of the Silver Crescent. Icon is pretty low on here, but again, this is one of those trinkets that is heavily influenced by fight duration. If you have a 1 minute fight and Icon of the Silver Crescent has like a 33% uptime, it's going to be a lot stronger than if you have a 2 minute fight where it comes off cooldown right as the fight ends. So the uptime is the lowest it can be. And also another thing with Icon is one of the strongest parts of the trinket is the fact that you can couple it with Avenging Wrath and get extra value from it. And also you use it on the pull. So you get a lot of extra initial threat, which is generally going to be the most important threat. Most Pallies aren't hurting for threat later in a fight. So that's something to keep in mind with Icon. And then at the bottom here, this is my realistic expectation of where the Ashtongue Talisman of Zeal will fall. So you can see it's last on here. So spell hit, definitely really important to make this trinket a lot better. All right, so for this last one, I use 15.91% spell hit. That's where most of my sets have been ending up. Not quite at that 16%, but just under it. So that's the number I used for that. The first one, Darkmoon Card Crusade, we already talked about that. The sheet doesn't necessarily capture the real value of this at the moment very well. Next, Skull of Gul'dan. So Skull Gul'dan's great, but hard to get, obviously, and Mark of the Champion. So Skull Gul'dan, Mark of the Champion are most likely going to be the two best trinkets, but Skull Gul'dan is hard to get, so you might not be able to. Mark of the Champion can be hard to get too, depending on how much gold you have to get it in a GDKP. So you may not be able to get either of those. So you might be looking at running Crusade and Ashtongue Talisman of Zeal here. You can see icon's pretty low, but we talked about how the value of that isn't necessarily indicated by this number. And I have mags last, what we fully expect. It gets worse the more spell hit you have. So Ashtongue Talisman of Zeal is kind of right in the middle here, and the trinkets above it are potentially hard to get, so it's definitely a good option. The biggest problem with this trinket is the variance on it, because a lot of these fights, you're not going to be using too many judgments because the fights are super short. So if you use like 15 judgments in a fight and you happen to get like 5 more procs of Enduring Judgment than you'd expect, it's going to be an insanely strong trinket. It's going to be way better than anything else on this list. But on the flip side, if you get 5 less procs than you expected, then it's going to be significantly worse than anything else on this list. So I only recommend this trinket if you're at spell hit cap or close to spell hit cap. Even then, it's got a ton of variance, so it's really up to your personal play style. If you like more consistent pulls, then this is definitely not the trinket for you. If you're kind of into gambling and you want to see if you can get some crazy proc rates, do a ton of damage, then it's a good trinket for that. Get some good parses. You're looking for that like 100% pull where you get like a crazy outlier parse. But I'm personally going to be using it. I just think it's kind of a fun trinket, so I'll be using it, and on average it is right in the mix with all the other trinkets, so that's what I'll be doing. But let me know if you guys have discovered anything else about this trinket that I didn't mention, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.